Well, hello there. Who are you?
This is the Zodiac speaking.
Killing must feel good to God, too. He does it all the time. And are we not created in his image?
We all go a little mad sometimes. After all, murder is, or should be, an art.
I could kill you now pretty easily. Do some interesting things before anyone showed up.
What are these films you can't wait to look at?
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast and the 25th episode of our series dedicated to on-screen serial killers of horror film and TV history. I'm your podcast host, Anna Bogutska. I've got my stalker cap on and I'm ready to talk about Joe Goldberg, everyone's favorite millennial amateur serial killer. I'm joined in this episode by writer, actor, and friend of the pod, Isaura Barbé-Brown, to talk about the highly enjoyable and highly trashy Netflix serial killer show You, which will come to an end this year. You, based on the books by Carolyn Kepnes, follows the romantic misadventures of Joe Goldberg, played by Penn Badgley, a bookstore manager by day and a serial killer by night. Joe, who loves reading and voiceovers, develops a dangerous obsession with an MFA student, and then an organic store owner, and then his neighbor, and then a librarian, and then a gallery owner. You get the point. Please be warned, this episode contains spoilers for the entirety of the series, You, which has now run for 4 seasons. We speak broadly about the entire show, and much like the show's lead actor, Penn Badgley, we make good-natured, lighthearted fun of it at times. Let me know your take on You and Joe Goldberg's invisibility powers by emailing me on hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk. And if you enjoyed this episode, this series, or this podcast in general, leave me a review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I read them all like a true online lurker, and I appreciate every single one. You can also go to Patreon and support the Final Girls over there. You can also find me online donning my shady person cap on Twitter and Instagram at Anna B. Demented. And with all of that said, please enjoy our take on You. I need to do the thing. I'm so sorry.
No, do it.
I'm gonna have to do the thing. Hello, You. I can't. I feel disgusting. I'm so sorry.
You have to do it. It's necessary. It's necessary.
You're the actor. I can't. I feel self-conscious doing it with you.
Should I do it?
Yeah, do it.
Hello, You.
I must spit up my coffee. I am so happy that we're doing this together. When I sent that email, I thought that nobody would want to talk about You. And you responded so quickly.
There's
so
always your little trashy friend. This is exactly what Den of Geek sends me to write as well. Like, do you want to write this trashy one? And I'm like, yeah.
I don't know. I think both of us are trashy then, because I have watched every single season of You.
Me too.
Some of them multiple times.
Like, definitely anticipating the final season. So I'm definitely going to watch it, probably all in one day. So Same. So let's get into it. This show has had a little bit of an unconventional rise to fame or to cultural relevancy, if it ever had any, after it moved from Showtime to Netflix way back in 2018. So the first series kind of just fell through the cracks, really. And then when it launched on Netflix and Netflix started producing the show, it just went everywhere. But I want to know, when and how did you start watching You? I was recommended You as a show to watch while I was doing my taxes. Someone said to me,
Perfect!
You can just put it on, you don't really have to concentrate,
And then obviously what happened is I got distracted from doing my taxes by watching you. But that's literally how I watched it the first time. I was like, I guess, well, I didn't know anything about it. And I was like, whatever, I guess I'll put this on. And that was it. And I was in.
I ask you the question that I'm asking myself every single time I find myself watching you. What keeps you watching the show?
It's definitely Penn Badgley. He's done a really good job. Not just he's a good actor, but he's also done a really good job outside the show of kind of continuing the interest in it. So I think it's definitely him. And there's something quite nice about just something quite melodramatic, and yes, it's definitely about murder, but it's like silly, and there is something quite nice about just turning your brain off a little bit and being like, this is actually a show I don't need to, like, when I rewatched it, I literally, like, usually I'm pretty diligent at pausing when I have to go do something. Did not need to. I didn't miss a thing. Like, if I went out the room and came back.
You know what I think part of that is the constant voiceover.
Right.
Because essentially you've got this lead character, this lead anti-hero, Joe Goldberg, narrating every single thought, but also every single act he's done as he's thinking of doing it, while he's doing it, and after he's done it. So it's kind of the perfect show to second screen, because you can be doing something else and you're just, it's like almost like half podcast, half TV show. It's telling you what's happening so that you don't actually have to watch it that much.
And he also flashes back a lot. So like, even if you miss something, he'll flash back about it in like a couple of seconds. And he's actually talked about that, right? Like, there's so much voiceover that he's like, in real life, there'd be scenes where he's just standing. Yeah. Silently staring at someone, not saying anything, because he's like, the voice is going in his head. I was like, he'd be like, it's funny that everyone just thinks he's normal, because that would definitely be like odd. You'd be like, what, are you okay? Are you having a stroke? Like, because it's like a long time sometimes where he's not saying a word.
Entire minutes. So let's get into, first and foremost, a little bit into Joe Goldberg, who is the protagonist and the antagonist of You. He is a amateur serial killer, a bookseller, in love with love.
In love
with
love.
And why is Joe Goldberg?
Who and why? I mean, what a special guy. He is, I like that you called him an amateur serial killer. He's getting there. What I love about him is that he sincerely, he's like the ultimate nice guy. Sincerely believes he's a really good guy.
1000%.
And like, just the murders are just kind of these things that happen to him. He's like, oh no. I can't believe this has happened again. Oh, damn. And if only that person hadn't done that irrational thing, then I wouldn't have had to do this. Like, and he, every single time, he genuinely, up until season 4, he genuinely believes that. And I think and it's funny because he's a romantic in the most terrifying sense. He genuinely, when he meets a girl, wants to do absolutely everything to make their life better. Like, that's genuine. But his means of doing that are questionable. Very questionable. And he's had like this tragic upbringing, which they kind of lean on a lot for like why he is the way he is. Like, his parents, like, his dad was violent. His mother like abandoned him. He was raised by someone like a bookseller who was abusive.
Who would put him in a cage.
Put him in a cage.
Because that's what you have as a bookseller. You have, first of all, you have a basement. Well done. Second of all, you have a giant cage to protect books and also imprisoned your adopted child.
Exactly. And no one ever goes down there, so it's fine. But you're just like, I don't know how many, because the cage, obviously it follows a lot of people. But like, when it's in the bakery, for example, like later on we'll get to it, but like, it's like, how many, I don't think I've ever been anywhere where there's like a weird glass cage in the room. I love that no one's questioned. Everyone's like, yeah, that's normal for a business.
I want to know how expensive and cumbersome it is to undo the cage and then ship it.
Because it must be really expensive, right? So we're assuming the same thing. It's the same cage, right?
Yes,
because
that's what I'm assuming.
You couldn't buy a new, like, how do you get the specific, like, I don't know how you do that.
I don't think they sell them on Amazon.
Maybe.
Maybe on eBay, but not on Amazon.
You can get a little Etsy glass cage. But But yeah, he thinks he's a nice guy. He thinks he's the ultimate romantic. He's like a guy who's literally like, I don't understand why I can't keep a girl. I'm so lovely. Yes, there's been a murder here and there, but I can explain those. That's how his genuine brain works. He's like, why is this not working out for me? And when he ends up inevitably killing the person he loves, he's just like, it didn't work out. So sad.
I know. Why
he treats it like a breakup rather than like the horrific crime that it is. He's just a bit like, what a shame that one didn't work out. But maybe next time, I'm hopeful. It's clever because he uses a language that we all use when you're like, I'm done with dating. I'm focusing on me. But most of us have just like gotten over a crush, whereas he's like, yeah, it's really a shame that I murdered and had to like bury my body of my last girlfriend. But I'm just going to give myself I'm going to heal. I'm going to do me for a while. And that's not even his only crime. He's also like forging stuff. He's doing a multitude of crimes, which he doesn't seem to think also are crimes. They're just like things you do. He's like, I must get that new passport.
It's very Tom Ripley of him. Of like, I must stalk this person. I must kidnap this other person. I must like, forge documents because that's just what I have to do to be the best version of me.
Obvious step. I feel like Tom Ripley's at least more aware of what he's doing. Tom Ripley's like, I guess I'm going to murder. He's like, no delusions about what he's doing. He's more like film Tom Ripley, where it's a bit like, oh no. This issue's come up. What do I do? Murder. He's just a bit like, I really didn't like that, but I just had to.
I'm obsessed with you because, and I was thinking about this because I was judging myself, being like, why? I can choose. Like, I pick the films and the shows that I cover on this podcast. And like, it's a lot of work. I'm like, why have I done this to myself? I don't think this is a good show. Why did I choose to talk about this on my show? And I actually think there's some merit. There's a lot of merit to the first season, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But I think what I kind of love about you and Joe Goldberg is that I'm not entirely sure this is intentional. Maybe this is me giving too much credit, but I love to overanalyze things, as we know. So on the one hand, you're completely right. Joe is so completely self-deluded, and the fact that the show is done so completely from his perspective, it's like everything is Delulu land for him. Yeah. He sees everything through these rose-tinted glasses. He thinks he's in a rom-com while we are watching a serial killer show. He thinks he's Julia Roberts, and we think he's Dexter.
Yeah, he doesn't even think he's Hugh Grant. He thinks he's Julia Roberts.
And I was like rewatching other episodes of the show to like get back into the vibe of you, because the vibe of you is so specific and fucking weird. It is the intense voiceover that kind of lulls you in, right? Because Ben Badgley has a really great voice. Yeah. And it's sort of like, kind of, he's doing like sexy voiceover voice as well, deliberately so. And so you're like lured in by how he's speaking. He's really eloquent. He's really romantic. He's like, hello, you. I've waited for you for so long. We will just spend the rest of our lives together by the fire, reading Faulkner and first editions of Oscar Wilde, because we are smarter and hotter than everyone else who's ever lived. And we'll have a murder basement, but let's not talk about that too much. And then at the same time, you're seeing these absolutely pathetic, like, at least in the first season, Brooklynites who are pretentious and cunty and so completely uninteresting. Yeah. I love the juxtaposition of what the characters think they're seeing and what we're seeing. And also just visually, it's so weird as well, because much like Joe thinks that he's in a rom-com, the show is shot like a rom-com. Yeah. Show me a visual difference between this show and like Emily in Paris.
Yeah, you're right. It's like even the stalking is kind of sort of like when he's watching the first girl, Beck, through her window. It's not done in this creepy, like leering way. It's quite like, look at, she's like so beautifully lit, and he's just there like gazing on her. And it's like, oh wait, is that good? No, probably not.
The other thing that I love, and again, I haven't read the books. I think this might be more about how the show has been sort of received also by culture. And I don't think this is deliberate. I think You is the perfect distillation of online dating culture.
Yes.
Like, people behave online. We've talked about this offline many times when we were dating. Everything about how people behave on dating apps has become so unbelievably just inhuman. So profoundly toxic and dispiriting and insulting to the point where, like, I don't actually think that people on dating apps are bad people, but they behave in bad ways because it's the system itself that's made us just weird and sort of unconscionable in many ways. And I've not been on the apps for a few years, but like I remember every single person I've spoken to who's still dating or on the apps has either abandoned them or just it has to take breaks every couple of months because it just gets to you. And I think the show is kind of similar, where like they've internalized the bad behavior so much that there's like, no, but this is just the way that you operate. This is just the way that you relate to people. This is the way that romantic relationships works now. You just find out everything you can about a person and you stalk them, and then you kind of have a script in your head and a running commentary happening while you're ostensibly getting to know someone.
But you also can see, first of all, I have to tell you that you doing that little pretend Joe Goldberg like bit like really worked for me. That was amazing. You should do ASMR. That was great. But like, I was like, oh my God, wait, are we in love? What's going on? But you can also see why in the show, especially in the first season, you could see why that would get you. If you met that guy and didn't know any of that stuff,
100% would get
it would be so easy to fall for him. You'd be like, oh my, and because he's kind of like a sponge or a mold, he just kind of becomes the man he thinks you need. It's like a bit scary because like you would fall for that, especially if they had like Penn Badgley face.
Yes.
Like you'd be like, oh, this guy is like so attentive and so interested in my interests and is really trying with my friends and is like happy to like do all the stuff like sexually and like romantically to satisfy me. Like it literally is. You know, and then also things just magically start kind of going right when he's in your life and you don't know why. You're like, oh, it's so cool that guy who was like bothering me has just disappeared. I'm so glad about that. Like, do you mean? And it's, it plays on it because it's just like, even though we do have access to all these people and people do all this stuff, they're still not that good at it. And he's actually good at it, which is what's so scary about him, is that he can so easily get himself into these people's lives. If you didn't believe that anyone would like him, it would like, you have to do so much work to get there. And it's so believable that a girl would meet this guy and be like, oh yeah, my God, absolutely.
So how does Penn Badgley play him?
He kind of plays him a bit like a startled deer. He's surprised a lot.
Or he fakes being surprised a lot.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He does surprise face a lot with stuff he already knows. He's so laid back as well. Like he knows everything about these people he's meeting, like all the friends and everything. And he's always like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. And like feathers never really get ruffled or anything like that. And so when it does happen, when he has a genuine emotion, it's actually really surprising. And I think he doesn't know what to do when he has a genuine emotion because he's so used to like just living this safe, easygoing, very chill guy. I'm just surprised by all this new information I'm getting. So wild. And he is funny. One of my favorite bits is when in the first season, Peach, is that her name?
Yes.
Peach, when she's obsessed, at least she's a Salinger, Peach Salinger.
Yes.
When
Amazing
she's
names.
obsessed with Beck and he's watching Peach watch Beck and he's like, oh my God, you're like so creepy. Like he's watching her. He's like snuck into Peach's house and he's like behind a door. They don't even know he's there, like watching them, being like, Peach is a freak. And I think he leans into the comedy of it, which really worked. You get the impression that, you know, he is this guy that's good at stuff, and the way he is with kids and stuff, I don't know. He plays him so well because you're like, you totally believe this. He's so good at covering all these bases. You see him being nice to a child, and he's always being nice to everybody. He's good at not changing his face. Obviously, I know the voiceover isn't actually happening while he's acting, but he's so good at like not showing anything on his face about how he feels about anybody.
Except for a few choice moments when he does, like when he's startled, he goes into an exaggerated melodramatic mode. And I think that's deliberate. I think it works.
Yeah.
So there's a few things about Penn Badgley. I think Penn Badgley is legitimately funny. Like him online in interviews.
Very funny.
He's a dude who does not take himself too seriously. He's understands online culture, which is, you know, impressive because it moves so quickly. He's legit witty and funny and kind of seems to have a good head on his shoulders.
Yeah.
And then Joe is so self-serious and also interestingly, like he's a handsome guy, right? But he's not handsome in a way that is distracting. Like, if you, like for instance, you know, if you get someone like Austin Butler walking into a bookshop, you would imagine that sort of everyone would just freeze and would just not breathe and watch what he's doing.
Also, if Austin Butler like got really interested in me and like started like doing all these, I'd be like, "What?" I'd be like, "You're trying to kill me. You're going to kill me."
Yeah, instantly. Instantly, I'd be like, "Is this a dare? Is this a plot?"
I'm going to die.
But Penn Badgley is that kind of like handsome Brooklyn or like Hackney dude who you're like, "Oh, you're handsome, but I would not see you out of the corner of my eye if I was just in a shop." Like, you're a guy who goes and shops in Tesco. You're a guy who has a job and has a nice pair of shoes and has hobbies, but I'm not going to remember you in a crowd. You know what I mean? If you're face to face with them, it's like, "Oh, I guess you're quite handsome, actually." Yeah. And that, I think, is Joe's superpower. And I think that's how Badgley plays him. He's like, forgettable enough that he's never in the way. He's never too flashy. He's never too, you know, memorable. He's nice enough to go unnoticed.
Yeah.
I mean, also that this show demands a lot of suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
But if I were to get very, like, criticky about it, I think that's the reason why he just put a fucking cap on and no one notices him literally standing in the middle of the street
He's
staring
just
at
like,
them.
"I'm a brunette white man. Like, who can say for sure if they saw me?
I'm a tree."
And it's he's like, "I could be anybody." Imagine, but honestly, like trying to describe him to the police would be like, he had brown hair, he was wearing a blue shirt, like he was wearing a generic cap. Like, what are you gonna say? And I love that he's always working. There's never a relaxed Joe Goldberg.
True.
Even when he's having sex, he is thinking very strategically about the sex he's having and what he wants to achieve from the sex he's having. He just gets that down that and that's why it's so funny because he's so meticulous in his planning that when he is surprised, it's always hilarious. He's like, "What? How did this happen?" Like, he's like, "I didn't know anyone else like was paying attention to shit." Like, especially when he gets recognized, he's always like, "But I'm wearing my cap. I'm wearing my invisibility cap. How did you see me?"
Sometimes I think that Joe, the way that Penn Badgley plays Joe Goldberg, is that he is convinced that he's the only person in the world who has an internal monologue. You know how there are some people who, I mean, I'm fascinated by this because I don't get it. So there are some people who don't have an internal monologue. Like, they don't hear themselves.
I know.
And I'm constantly thinking about, like, what must that be like to go through life without an internal monologue? Yeah. And I imagine in the show that Joe thinks that he's the only person that ever existed that is alive right now that has an internal monologue. No one else has.
It's also interesting because I think thinks he's the only person who like looks people up on the internet. Like, whenever someone he's dating is like, "I looked this person up," he's like, "They looked them up." It's like, yeah, everyone's online, Joe. Like,
it's like on Catfish, if you ever watch Catfish, where they're like, "We're just gonna reverse image search them. No one's ever done this."
So you could have done this. You could have done this like months ago. He's always like so surprised, like, "Oh, why are they looking that?" It's like, because they're a person. They're a person in the world. Why wouldn't they look these? And like when people look him up, he's just a bit like, "Oh, they've like researched." And also, it's very funny because I do think he thinks he's invisible because he actually is not that good at like not appearing in like pictures and stuff, especially by the second season. Yeah. And so I'm just like, your face is on the internet as like a person. Like, so you are findable. It's not like you've never had your picture taken or you've never like been involved in anything. And it's really funny to me that he's always a bit like, oh, it's like, you're not trying that hard to be like not snapped or not like, yeah, man, like the
internet works both ways.
Yeah.
It works both ways.
And also his searches aren't like Facebook like Instagram. It's like, you're not hacking anything like most of the time. Like you're doing the same search as everybody else.
I kind of want to talk a bit about series 1 because I feel like that is an exception to you. There's been 4 seasons so far. The 5th season is forthcoming in October, I think. And they all kind of follow the same structure, right? Joe becomes obsessed with a woman. Joe invents a new persona so that he can adapt himself to the ideal man of this woman that he's obsessed with. Joe gets backed into a corner. Joe finds Joe finds a young person, a kid who's in trouble in some way and feels protective of them. Then shit hits the fan. Joe sheds his persona, and at the end of the season, he's finally ready to embrace his true identity. And then the next season, everything repeats once again. But what do you think of the first season? And is it sort of kind of good?
It is kind of good because I just never seen anything like it before. Like you said, it's because it's from his perspective. And it's one of those ones you're really like, oh, you're hoping he doesn't get caught, even though you know he's like the bad guy. When he's almost about to get caught, you're like, oh shit. And also like watching him take down every red flag thing that comes up or watching him react to new information is so fascinating. Especially like the parts when he's like convinced he's going to let someone go and he really believes it. And you're just like, hun, watching him like maintain his life. I don't know where he finds the time, first of all. Watching him stalk, date, maintain life, like have a job, help the kid who lives in his building is just like, and it's interesting because as a character, especially in that first season, like, because obviously in the first season, there's a neighbor who's abusive, right? His neighbor's dating a guy who's a parole officer who's like abusive to the mom. The kid hates him. It's like awful. And he takes him a long time to be violent with him. Whereas it's a drop of a hat for other people sometimes. And so it's fascinating to watch him kind of take his lumps and like he gets beat up by that guy. He knows a kid's in a horrible situation. He knows a mum's in a horrible situation. And he tries to help in a way that a person who wasn't a serial killer tries to help. He tries to help in ways that feel like more legitimate. Like he gives the kid a safe space to...
He gives him books. He gives him like a sandwich when his mom has forgotten to feed him. He tries to get the mom to, like stop drinking, stop dating this abusive dude.
And it's funny, it's interesting because it doesn't play into his narrative of himself, right? To kill that guy because he knows it'd be good for him to be gone doesn't play into who he thinks he is. I only murder if I absolutely have to. And I'm not a murderer. I would never intend to murder. I'm literally like in a bad position, like I can't do anything else. He feels like it's self-defense most of the time.
That's why I call him an amateur serial killer.
Right. He doesn't do anything about the neighbor because in his weird moral code, that would be a crime. That would actually be a crime to go and murder this guy because it would just help this family.
For context, after I watched a series, I think when it first landed on Netflix, and then subsequently I was watching the other seasons, and then when I started dating my boyfriend, I told him about you and I showed him you, and I sort of rotted his brain, and now we're still watching you, so I'm rewatching. But I remember when we rewatched the first season, I was like, okay, this is sort of genuinely kind of good because it is so incredibly tied to Joe's perspective. But I was really intrigued by just how awful Guinevere Beck was. And I love that about the show. Beck, who's his object of obsession in the first season, she's this absolutely basic, annoying, untalented young woman who is so unbelievably mid. This is genius. She is radically not special. She is not perfect in any way. She's not put on the pedestal by the show. The show shows us that she's not that great. She's kind of a bad friend. She's annoying. She's very self-obsessed. And frankly, like, just not that interesting. Like, she does yoga. She thinks that she is some sort of profound writer. She's not. And just kind of fucks about in New York for her entire day. But Joe just puts her on this massive pedestal. He sort of like refuses to see her for who she really is. He sees her as like this image and how he can make her life better, and he can almost make her better. And together they would sort of rule the world and be the greatest love story ever told. We've seen how that has ended for other people. But I kind of love the show for that, because Beck is so unbelievably basic. I'm like, okay, it is really not about her, which I think is like a really smart way of making, serial killer shows very often kind of are walking the line between glorifying the killer and over victimizing the victim, or like making them into this like perfect unimpeachable person so that we feel even more terrible about what is happening to them and what happens to them. And I love that the show was like, no, it actually doesn't matter whether the victim was a perfect person or not. It's still shit what happens to them, and they still don't deserve it. It's all because of this completely twisted vision that the guy has, that Joe Goldberg has.
Yeah, that he's entirely put on another person because of one thing he's decided to like hyper focus on.
Yeah.
With Beck, it's like, she picks a book. He notices her, but then she's also reads, and he's like, oh my God.
Oh my God, a woman who reads? I've never met one. This is the love of my life.
And considering he works in a bookshop, it's like, how many women come in? He needs to make them special because it justifies all the things he wants to do. So they have to be more special than he's imagining, right? Than they are, because otherwise, how's it justified doing all the stuff, right?
Yes.
So Joe's like lizard brain is going like, she's not great, she's not the best, but he's like, no, she has to be.
Yes.
She has to be the best, because otherwise, why would I be doing all of this?
Exactly. She has to be the best because then it validates my specialness, that she is so special.
Exactly.
What do you think of Joe's love interest? We've got Beck in season 1, we've got Love in season 2, Marianne in season 3, and finally Kate in season 4.
They're quite different women. I think what really makes him commit is finding out there's something they need, right? Finding out they need help in some way. Finding out there's some tragedy in their life, and he's like, I can fix that. Maybe he's a little bit interested, but that's always what tips him over, is that he's like, oh my God, you need saving, I can do that. But they're very different women. Like we said, Beck is very basic, not particularly anything special about her at all. Love, on the other hand, is like this she's a talented cook. In the first season, I think when you first meet her, she seems quite sweet. Her family life she's from money, but her family life isn't amazing. She's become a de facto like carer for her brother, who's like an addict. 40 fucking
Again,
40.
the names.
40 in love, my God.
Obsessed.
But she's different to Beck, because you can actually see what, like, and because it's, what's her name, Victoria
Pedretti,
who's adorable. So much more like, okay, you'd see why someone would fall for her. I'm sure a lot of people fall for her. And it's interesting as we progress, because you think maybe she falls for him because she sees something of herself in him, because she does just seem quite sweet and special at the beginning. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, you're the same.
I want to hear what you think. As a kind of slight parenthesis, I would love to know what you thought of the twist in season 2.
I loved it.
I love it too.
I was like, oh, Joe, she's matching your freak. Like, is this not the perfect woman for you? But he's like, what the fuck? He's like horrified. And it's like, you should be elated. She's perfect for you. Just depleted his whole I'm a good guy thing, right? Because he couldn't justify any of it. This is the perfect girl for you.
I love it a lot. Yeah, I loved how it was revealed. I love how Victoria Pedretti plays a female version of Joe, essentially. How there's a different flavor to her kind of serial killer. She's a lot more impulsive. Yeah. She's, again, completely self-deluded in the same way as he is. And so obsessed with him. Like, they're obsessed with each other.
Yeah.
But Joe, once he essentially meets his match, he's like, ew. I don't want a female version of me.
Gets more obsessed. She's like, perfect. We can just handle our murders together. So I like her because I think she's the most unexpected one, right? Because she is his perfect match. It would have been really interesting if she was like the last girl he met. I mean, I love season 2 as well. Like, I think that I love parts of season 2. With Marianne, that's definitely like his classic, she needs saving, she needs my help. And she's a much more serious woman and much more clued in. And the only reason she like gets with him is because she thinks his marriage is breaking up. She handles it much more openly. So she, like, once she realizes that that wasn't happening, she's out. Like, she's not someone he could win over necessarily with all that stuff. Her focus is her daughter. And so he was never going to really be enough to entirely distract her. And it's a good thing because eventually it doesn't seem like a character would ever hurt a child, but if it got in the way of him and Marianne, if she was making decisions to not be with Joe because of her daughter, I wonder how that would have played out, because he does need the person to be entirely focused on him, right?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't feel like that was ever going to be the case with Marianne, even if they got together, even if, like, you know, he killed love successfully and then, like, with that one, he hid it successfully. And then with Kate's an odd one, because Kate's, like, much tougher, I think, than
she's cold.
She's very, very British, very cold. And she's done much darker things in a much bigger scale. In her life, and she's much more used to kind of this very like aristocracy, like people do terrible things all the time, it's not that big a deal kind of vibe. It's more odd that she likes him, and I think I find the fourth season a slog, and I think because it's less believable that this woman would find this American man, especially this incredibly British woman, would find this amenable American man interesting. The point where she falls for him is he follows her to a pub where she's told him several times not to follow her, and then he says something about his child, and she's like in from that point. She has sex with him right after it. I was like, I don't believe this. I found that one a bit harder to.
Yeah, I don't really get why Kate would fall for him either. Also particularly because, like, once their kind of true natures are revealed, which I think is what the show is trying to get us to see, that they're bonding over, that, you know, he's a serial killer, she's the daughter of like an arms dealer and has like done a lot of shady shit, but in a quiet way, in the way that rich people do. So it's like she's sort of elevating his crimes and he's making her feel better about her crimes, but that's not really enough. And also there's like, I don't really understand why she would take him in, because he would require like so much work on her side. So I wonder if it's just he is completely devoted to her in a way that she wants, and she can essentially own him. Like, she's so powerful and so rich and has so many connections that she can mold him into the version of the partner that she wants.
Maybe, but I think because it feels like with her, the person she's with at the beginning of season 4, this buffoon, this British like idiot,
floppy-haired dude,
yeah. It's like, well, she seems smarter than that too. So it seems like she just dates within like, that's who you date when you're someone like me. And that guy was definitely moldable, definitely controllable with her family, with her power, whatever. But he was an idiot. So I think she was it feels like she was looking more for her equal. And so she's like, oh, he's equally intelligent as me. And so it's worth it because then, we can become this kind of like murder power couple, because I can have these honest conversations with him. He's not someone I have to look after in that same sense. He understands the way shit works, because she like literally like scrubs the internet for him.
I mean, that's how season 4 ends. They're basically doing an interview for a profile about how he was love's victim all along and faked his death and gave up his son. But I mean, I love when press agents are in TV and movies all the time, because you can just see this high-powered publicist pacing around the room while this interview is happening, just like clicking her tongue when she doesn't like where the conversation is going. Love that. So like the positioning is there. They're going to start a foundation. Joe has bought a bookshop. The thing that I find really funny about season 4, and we have to talk about it because it is the most unhinged version of you.
Yeah.
He becomes rich. He starts this show by like not poor, but sort of very, scraping by. He's working in a bookshop. He's living in a sort of rundown apartment. He really looks down on the rich and the glamorous. He really despises them. And similarly in season 4, where he arrives in London, it's Joe Goldberg on holiday. That's the season.
Yeah.
he ends up being involved with this ultra posh and the ultra wealthy and like proper wealth, not just rich.
Yeah.
And he has so much contempt for them, but he ends up becoming one of them through his relationship with Kate. And, you know, he's like, oh, okay, well, it just means I'm going to wear better clothes and I can just buy as many books as I want.
And what's funny is that this is another way he's like Ripley. I wonder how much Ripley influenced this, actually, because, like, it's that thing of, like, he's like, oh, I do rich better than you guys do.
Yes.
It's very toned down. It's very sophisticated. And I feel like even just the way he makes the coffee, and it's like he's suddenly, like, in his element. And it's just, like, he hates, like, the vulgarity of rich people, but in the same way that we've talked about, like, Tom Ripley he just wants to be on his own with his art books, with these nice things. Joe wants to, like, have his first editions, his nice books, his nice old things. And it does make sense that he's in London, and, like, because it's that thing of, like, it's an antiquated sense of, like, money. Like, his office in London, like in the university in London, you could imagine he'd been wanting something like that his entire life. This all wood, like, paneled, gorgeous old thing. And it kind of suits him. It kind of fits in with who he always was. He made less sense in New York because he is kind of old-fashioned. Like, that's one of the things they talk about. He does have social media, and he's like, oh, I just don't really like old-fashioned guy. He's like, my friends are books.
He's like Matilda if Matilda grew up to be a serial killer.
Exactly. One of the red flags that Beck ignores when she's like, where are your friends? And he's like, my friends, my books. And it's like, it is weird that an adult man in New York has zero friends. I think it suits, I think the kind of rich that Kate is, this kind of very classy, very with British, very clipped, very held back, like unlike her friends, but she's quintessentially British about it. I think it suits him, and I think he can fit into that because he's like, oh, I like all of this. They will both be in a room, like, quietly reading a book together, listening to classical music.
I mean, to be honest, that sounds fucking great.
It sounds wonderful. That's the life he's got, and which all the girls that have come previously, he couldn't have really had that life.
Yeah.
And so this fits into, I think, who he is more.
So I have to ask, because you're a born and bred Londoner.
Yeah.
I'm an adopted Londoner. What do you think about the way that season 4 portrays London and the Brits?
I will say one thing I think that season 4 got right. They weren't we're just in, like, Piccadilly the whole time. He's staying in Kensington. You're seeing, like, actual streets where people live. The location-wise, it did feel a little bit more like, oh, these are actual places, actual streets that are residential, rather than, like, we're just in Soho for some reason all the time. Or when they go from one place to, like, there's a bit where he walks from Kensington Station to his flat, and it's the actual walk. That's so rare in an American show, because usually they're walking by the river, then they walk to Brixton, and you're like, I don't know how you got here. I don't know what happened.
Although also there is in the very first episode of season 4 where he's, like, walking from his university, which is, I can't remember which university it was, but it's definitely not across the street from Shoreditch.
That campus in London, I'm like, now, because everyone's just like, they're all times like, oh, there's this giant green, like, London, like, old campus that everyone's just working at. And even the street, and there is stuff like the street he lives on, there's nothing cheaper than £1 million, like, flat on that street. Oh,
he lives in South Kensington.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
That street especially is, like, fucking insane. I don't know what situation you'd be in or to be able to live there.
Again, it's filmed like a rom-com. He even references, but he's like, no, you're Julia Roberts in Notting Hill.
Yeah.
Like, you get to experience a fictional version of London where a jobless serial killer can come in, land himself a professorship in a London university, and then land himself a bougie apartment on one of the most expensive, like, cul-de-sacs in South fucking Kensington.
And even, I do think, so at the private members club, first of all, one of the things they got wrong is how dressed up any rich person is. Like,
oh my God,
no one would look like this.
No.
They're not dressing up, unless there's paparazzi, unless it's like a literal, like, red carpet event. They are not. If you've been to any of the private members, it's like, no one's dressed up.
They will look like Joe in season 1. With their caps and everything.
Right. And they're so understated. They're trying so hard not to be like, oh, I'm just trying to be normal.
I'm just Jude Law. Leave me alone. Don't look at me.
I'm just trying to be like a regular, like a regular guy. And so it's funny because they're so, like, brash and out there. Even that first night he goes and they're all, like, doing shots and getting him. I was like, no. have you met rich people? No.
Yeah.
It would be the driest party, first of all. Everyone would just be doing coke. They're too outspoken. And also in their rudeness, like they'd be fake nice, most likely, to someone who's in their inner circles introducing them. They'd be fake nice to them. They'd talk about them afterwards when they're out the room.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
The Brits in the show feel very in-your-face rude.
Yeah.
Whereas the flavor of rudeness that you get from people here is very different.
Clearly they weren't being nice. It'd be so fake nice, and they would be so uninterested in you, but it wouldn't be like that. Like they wouldn't just be mean to you to your face. It'd also be weird that he was invited to a bunch of shit like this. I guess because what's her face takes it. What's her name? The lady.
Lady Phoebe?
Phoebe.
It's Lady Phoebe.
Lady Phoebe.
I'm just looking at the character names right now. I was like, Lady Phoebe, Reese Montrose. Get a goddamn grip.
I know, but only because she takes a liking to him. And especially with her, like there's so many things that I'm like, you don't really know the difference between like a rich person who's like a celebrity or an influencer or something in England and like someone who's literal aristocracy, because this is not what it looks like. And the same with like when they go to the country house, it's such a caricature. It's like the same with Saltburn. I was like, if you've ever been to like a fancy British country house, it's very boring. I wish I wish someone got hunted. I don't. But like, no, it's actually much less interesting than this. Like they're not that fun. It's much more like, you know that film, All My Friends Hate Me? It's much more like that, where everyone gets a bit drunk and mean, but it's in a very boring way.
Yeah.
Very hammy. It's like very like telenovela-y. Like these characters are so specific and so outrageous. Why would anyone like any of these people? And I think they missed a subtle thing about Britishness. Like they miss a subtlety with how they are mean and it's much closer actually to how Beck's friends were in the first season. It would be much more like that.
I wonder if this is kind of the cultural clash that might seem hilarious for us because we live in London and have kind of met these kind of people, but it does feel like it's very written by Americans looking at the British class system and trying to understand how very, very posh people would behave.
Yeah. And even the fact that they were at that private members club so much, I'm just like, they'd be out to dinner or like, it's just like not a thing. They don't really have like a local they hang out at. And again, like they were dressed up every time. And I was like, dude, they'd be in like a very expensive outfit that looked like it'd been driven over backwards. Like it wouldn't be.
You know, it's like a poor person's vision of what rich people do in their leisure time. And I think, again, it kind of tracks with this entire show being from Joe's perspective. Like, this is what he thinks of these people, as opposed to this is what they are really doing. But I think kind of the show has devolved into this way where like his delusion is now kind of fully matching with what we see on screen. Whereas in season 1, we kind of got to see real Beck, and her life and her personality did not match with the vision of her that Joe had, that he was narrating, which is why it was kind of good. What do you think are the moments where Joe goes full psychopath?
It's so funny because he's so calm and like collected most of the time. And then when he loses it, it's really like, oh, you're gone. Like you have no self-control in this moment. When he stabs Marianne's ex is one of those moments where it's just like, there's no situation here where you are not going to kill him. He probably is planning to kill him, but in a much more like smart way. And then he just stabs him up and then walks away. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes you just can't hold back. Just can't really stop yourself from being this guy.
From doing a little murder.
Doing a little murder. And then it's always funny how he reacts when someone else is. So in the 4th season, there's like Kate's or Lady Phoebe's like bodyguard who's onto him, but is also so weird about being onto him because Joe can't tell if he's being chummy or not, which is actually like quite a funny like British American thing because the guy's obviously trying to be threatening and Joe's like, hello. Like he's like, oh, we're just having a chat because we're the same. And the guy's like, no, this guy's like threatening to kill you. Like it takes him a minute to get. He's like, "Oh wait, we're not friends." it's funny because in the moments when he's just like, oh my, he's like so surprised that someone's been watching him and like someone's like caught him out. He just like is fully with everything he's got. He's like, I'm going to do a murder. And he deals with it quite quickly and he just doesn't really think about it a lot. Like he doesn't really talk about that guy like at all. After he murders him, he's like, anyway, that was a weird blip. That was weird. He just kind of, and even Marianne's ex, he kind of dwells on murders quite a lot because he feels bad about them usually.
Yeah, he thinks about them all the time.
The ones when he fully loses it, he just does it. He's like, anyway, I don't know what happened there.
It's like it didn't happen. He's like, oh, that's not how I see myself behaving. I'm just going to delete it from my memory.
That was just like a weird day. He like treats it like he ate like a bad clam. He's just like, oh, odd. I felt really weird that day anyway. He just doesn't really lament on the same way he does other ones. So I love it when he goes full unhinged. And when he just really gets caught out in a way that he does no real excuse for anything he's doing. And he's like, when he like the first season, I think he does it. And when he attacks Dr. Nikki is the only time we see him quite emotional. Or when he's fighting with Peaches. Basically, it's usually when someone is onto him.
I love it as well in seasons 2 and 3 when he's with Love. So season 2, it's a lot about his relationship with Love, and then the twist at the very, very end is that she's also a murderer. And the way that he looks at her through the cage when she reveals herself, he's like a cat who's been put into a bath. You know, he's like, what? I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. And then in season 3, when Love keeps like accidentally, murdering people that annoy her for one reason or another, or because she's jealous of the neighbor who Joe has been stalking or lurking about. And then she calls him because she doesn't know how to clean up the bodies, which, by the way, if you're going to murder people, you're going to learn the cleanup. That's the whole point,
This is what we always say. The hard bit is the bit afterwards, love. You can't just be murdering people. That's the easy part. The hard bit's the body disposal. And I love that it's addressed that he's just like, I just want to do the hard bit. And then she's like giving him critiques on it. And he's like, well, do you want to do it? Because
exactly.
I don't believe you have a plan.
I love his face when he comes in and he's like, again?
He's like, for God's sake, love. I love that that's like the recurring argument in their relationship is like when and how they murder. It's like not money or anything. He's just like, it's really inconvenient how you murder people actually, and that you don't want to clean up afterwards.
I love that the other great episode in season 2, Sean might dump me for this, but because he loves 40, but I fucking hate 40.
I hate 40.
I hate 40
I hate him
so much.
That fucking brat, like that little rich brat. Not talking about any Charlie XCX fans. Don't come
Not
for
the
me.
good kind of brat.
Not anyone having a brat summer. You're good. You don't belong in a glass box, but 40 does. So annoying.
The best unhinged moment for me, which I was like, you know what, Joe? I think this one is justified. When 40 drugs him and then hires Russian dudes to guard them in a hotel room, like an expensive 5-star suite, so that they can rewrite 40's like genius script, which is actually a script of Joe's relationship with Beck. I was like, murder him right now.
Murder him right now. Even just how clingy he is with Love. It's just like, you're a whiny man baby and I cannot stand you. One of the real unhinged things that happens when Candace comes back in that season 3. So she's his first, right? The girlfriend we assume is he killed, right? In the first season, it's assumed he killed her, and then she comes back at the end of season 1, which is why he moves to LA to escape Candace. And then she comes back dating 40. And I think for me, that's when I was like, oh, what are we doing? What are we doing? Because if I had been, my stalky boyfriend had tried to kill me or thought he killed me by accident and then like buried me in the woods and I survived that, and he doesn't know I'm alive, I'd be like, I'm coming back and the first time I see him, I'm shooting him with a gun. Yeah. Like, I would not be like, have some convoluted plan. I don't want to have a conversation. I'm like, I'm going to kill it with fire. Are you joking? Like, you're going to date someone to get... It's like, what's the plan, Candace?
Also, Candace, first of all, she renames herself Amy Adam.
Oh my God. And he's like, was Britney Spears taken? Which is really funny. I think 40 says that line.
But also, she has to put her genius plan is to put herself through dating 40 to get to Joe.
Right.
I'd be like, no, it's not worth it. It's
not
just not worth
it. And then also it's just like she doesn't even actually have a plan, right? Because then I would have gone to so many self-defense classes. You're in America. I would have owned a gun. I would have I would have been a sharpshooter, right? She's had a long time. And I'm like, I would have been ready. There's a bit where she has a knife when he comes to a tent. He follows her into a tent and she's like, she's not even holding a knife properly. I'm like, you haven't even learned to hold a fucking knife, Candace. You're going to see your serial killer ex-boyfriend and you're like, let me not like know how to protect myself in any way. And I don't know what the plan was. You're trying to entrap him in some convoluted like supervillain way when he doesn't know you're alive. No one even knows you're connected. You could have come, shot him, walked away, and literally no one would know what the fuck happened. You could have left a bunch of evidence in there and just been like, cool.
He thought you were dead. You were clear, girl. You did not need to do any of this.
Exactly. You could have knocked on his door, shot him. And it just lost me at that because I was like, why would you do this? If I was out for revenge, it would be swift and like decisive. I don't know what games we're playing.
That actually leads me into my next question for you. Who from the show would you put into your own basement murder cage, which I'm sure you have in your new flat? Listen,
I auditioned for the season 4 one in London. And my big question was, I had a recall. I didn't get it, obviously. I'm not in there. But my big question at the recall was like, does my character go in the box? And they were like, no. And I was like, oh, less interested. It would definitely be, it's 40.
Yes.
Because and not even to eventually kill him, just forever. I just make him live in there forever. Yeah. Or the guy who's obsessed with Kate in season 4, who tries to hunt Joe. Yeah, he can also go in there. And also he could die in there. I don't like him at all. Like, he can expire in there. But 40 I would just keep there forever.
Yes.
As like an annoying pet.
Yes. And also, obviously, the pedophile from season 2.
There's a pedophile in season 2? Oh, the comedian guy.
Yeah, the comedian.
Oh, yes.
Henderson was his name.
Yes,
who turned out to also be a creeper in real life.
Yes. Oh, God. Oh, yeah. When art imitates life. But yeah, those are the people I'd be like, you need to spend some time in the box.
I would like section off the box into, smaller boxes. And I would put 40 in one. And his is the only one that the other boxes can hear because he's so annoying and he will not stop talking. So then you'd have the truly like evil other dudes, Roald, who's a sociopath, Henderson, who's a pedophile, have to listen to 40 talk over and over and over again, just talk shit endlessly.
Yeah.
And not be able to tune him out.
You know who's really great in the box? Will.
But he's good.
He's a nice dude. I know, but I mean, he really made the most of it.
He did.
And like the fact that I love there's a bit where he calls him and he's like with his girlfriend. And he's just like having a lovely time and talking to Joe like he's an old friend. I'm like, you really mastered like box living. You really got, he got clean kind of. Like, I was like, you really nailed it. Like, you've come out the other side of this. Like, really, like Joe's calling you for advice.
I would not want Joe Goldberg to have my number. Even if I did manage to get out of the box.
He's just like, well, and then Marianne made it out of the box. Like, there's people that you're like, okay, we're glad they survived. Yeah. But like, yeah, there are people that definitely should have spent some time in the box and like didn't make it in there.
And we know that Joe, even though he doesn't want to admit it, has stalked a lot of people. He has killed a lot of people. But what do you think is the worst thing that Joe Goldberg has done on the show?
The worst thing? That's a very hard one. I think what he did to Marianne.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's horrifying. Like, you've managed to go to Europe and then imagine him just fucking turning up.
Yeah.
And then how paranoid she is when she's getting to the train. And she's right to be because he's just there. Mm-hmm. And he's full psychotic at that point. He doesn't even know it's him. So, like, he's someone else at that point. So, he, like, it's even scarier. Like, the fact he forgets because he's literally forgetting that he kidnapped her, forgets to feed her for ages. And if that his student hadn't found her, she would have died in there, just by starvation. What she has to do to get herself out of it. And she'll never not have that fear that he'll find her.
Yeah.
Especially now she's reading, right? I think we see her that she's reading the story that him and Kate have put out, you know, about him surviving love. And I was like, knowing that he's rehabilitated his image and he can kind of be anywhere now would be terrifying. He has all these resources suddenly. So I think everything he did was bad. And also, he didn't kill Jenny Ortega's big sister in season 2, but the fact that he put her in a position to be killed and has left this girl entirely on her own is also shit.
I would also like to add in season 4, messy as it is, what he does to Nadia, his student, who he sort of likes, who's sort of the Jenny Ortega figure. She's smart. He sort of takes a shine to her. It's never romantic. It's never sexual. But she's also the one who sort of figures out who Joe is and tries to expose him. But then he, in the very first episode, at the very end, he essentially threatens her, and he puts the gun or the knife in her hand to get her prints of it, and he's like, I've got the murder weapon with your prints on it. I've just killed your boyfriend, who had done nothing, who was just this
that poor guy,
sweet little Ed. And he's like, I will put you in jail for the rest of your life if you try to say anything. And he lets her go, but now she's in that position where she has to live with the shadow of Joe, a now powerful and rich Joe, connected Joe.
She's also in prison. So because he basically sets it up that the boyfriend could have been framed for all of it, and that's why she killed him, because she realized that he was the person that had been doing all this stuff. And she doesn't do that. She just goes to prison. And I do kind of, it's interesting because it's a big shift in Joe, right? Because at this point, after he's hallucinated a best friend for God. The whole season.
We don't even have to talk about it. That was just stupid.
It was so dumb. But it just leads to him embracing his dark side, to him being like, I'm good at murder, I'm a murderer. And finally, after several bodies,
he's gone pro. He's a professional serial killer.
He's
now.
I'm in the big leagues now. I'm actually looking for sponsorship. He finally accepts that that's his talent. That's what he's good at. He's also good at being a boyfriend or husband. He can play this role for Kate. He can be the dutiful, doting. He says all the right things in the interview. And also he can be good at what he does if anything gets too difficult without pretending he's not doing it. So it's this big shift where he's calm as he's ever been. But he's smiling in a way. And Penn Padgett plays it so well because it is a different even face on Joe than we've ever seen, because he's not desperately trying to convince her. He's very calmly explaining to her what's going to happen in a way that usually he's much more desperate when he's trying to cover something up. He's much more like, look, it's going to be fine. Don't worry. You're just going to do this and da-da-da. But he's not. He's just like, listen, this is what's going to happen. This is what you can do. If you say anything, this will happen. And because he's fully embraced it now, he's just much more relaxed, much happier, because he's not trying to convince himself he's not doing the bad thing. So I do like that shift, but it is awful what he does to her. And I think one of these women has to come from at some point.
As we wrap up, what do you expect or what do you want from the 5th and final season of You?
I feel like he has to die. If they end it with him alive, I'm just like, well, he has to die. And it will either be his own misjudgment, someone's been playing a really long game with him, or it will be like Jenny Ortega will make a surprise appearance and just end him. It'll be some unexpected. And I think it'll be at a point where he thinks he's really got it all down. He's really got it together. I think his guard will be down. I think while he's more comfortable in this position with Kate now and he's embraced his dark side, I think it will put his guards down in a way they never have been before, because money does come with a certain level of protection.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to not be as good at what he does anymore because he's too comfortable.
That's interesting. I reckon that Marianne will come back. Ooh. I think she'll come back. I think she's going to be the one that exposes him. And I wonder, I think it would be really a poetic ending for Joe to die in his own murder cage, to be locked in, and with either nobody knowing where he is, or with him being live streamed, because Marianne has set it up so that all of his lies and his real shit is exposed in a way that not even money can cover up and protect.
Right. Yeah, something where it's like, and Kate will have deniability because she'll be like, I had no idea, I just met this like lovely man. And but I think one of the previous victims who survived of his will be involved, but I think he won't be as aware of himself or as careful as he usually is because he's protected now, because he doesn't have to work, he doesn't have to do anything. I think his judgment will be a little bit off, is what I think. And also now he's kind of a figure, like a recognizable
public
face.
figure, yeah.
Right. So I also think he'll try and do his usual shit and it won't be as easy. I think there's also that thing. And I think the nature, which we kind of saw a little bit with Love and 40, how their family are rich. So they always have a little bit of that thing of like, we're just checking up on people. And even Kate's dad, I mean, he knew who Joe, because he was living under the name Jonathan, right? When he's in London. But Kate's dad meets him for the first time, is like, hi, Joe. And it's just like, so you are, like, when someone has the resources, you are findable. And I think he forgets that, like, rich people are also suspicious of each other. So even though you're in Kate's life now and she's accepted a lot about you, it doesn't mean there isn't kind of a background thing of, like, surveillance happening.
I love that. Sarah, this has been very fun.
Very fun.
I think we've actually probably given you more thought than the writer's room has.
Yeah, the deep dive into you no one knew they needed. But it's weird what it's done, because every time I wear a cap in public now, I feel like I'm a little bit stalky.
Did you wear your cap for this recording? Because I'm wearing my cap right now.
I'm wearing my little red cap right now, my generic red cap. But like
I'm wearing a little green cap that says Shady Person, which I think is very appropriate for this episode.
It's almost like a double bluff, right? It's like, well, that person's not stalking me because why would they wear such a distinct cap?
Yeah.
When I go out in the street, I do feel a bit like, oh, I could be anyone. Like, I'm invisible.
They can't see me now. I'm too
it's
generic.
It's really affected it. And he's, like he said, he's been so good as far as like social media and like Penn has in like handling the success of it in a way that's like responsible, funny, and like lighthearted, that it's just made it this like fun thing to be. Yeah, I think because he's so level-headed about it as well.
Yeah, and he's always been very good at being like, listen, it's all fun and good, but please, please, please don't thirst after this dude. This is like not someone you want to emulate or even have in your life.
If anyone's doing this stuff, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
It's not fun. But yeah, so I think it's just kind of, I think if it wasn't him, I don't know if it would be as fun a show. If there wasn't all the cultural thing, if there wasn't the outside thing, if he wasn't so good at interviews and like, there wasn't that element of funny in it, I don't know if it would be as successful. There is stuff to think about it. It makes me very wary of dating. I know what to look for, you know? Very aware of like basement cages.
No one has basements in London.
Some people do, Anna. And you know what? At least now I know, like, I'm like, there's a key somewhere. So just got to remember.
Just got to look for the key.
Got to look for the secret key inside, because there's always a fail-safe.
And there has to be. Otherwise, if you get stuck in the cage, how are you going to get out?
How are you going to get out? But yeah, so I think it's interesting that it's had the cultural impact that it's had. And I do wonder what they're going to do with the film. I hope they pull it back a little bit from season 4. I hope there's less characters. I hope the world's a bit smaller again, like it was in season 1.
I hope so too. We just need Joe and the object of his obsession.
Exactly.
Really.
And then the person who's the object of his demise, who's going to like come and kill him.
Sarah, thank you so much. So where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me on Twitter or X at Isaura_BB, or on Instagram at Isaurasaurus. I post anything I'm doing on there. And sometimes I pop up on TV. I'm not going to list all the things. If you're watching TV, I might be there occasionally. For an episode, so enjoy that, I guess.
Maybe I'll pop up in season 5 of you. Can you imagine?
Could you imagine if I took this whole time?
I would love
who knows what's going to happen? And I'm in there. No, I'm not going to pop up in that one. But other things.
Loss.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you so much for this.
No worries. That was so fun.